The leaky roof. Daisy awoke to a drip. Not the gentle, rhythmic drip of a tap left running, but a sharp, insistent plink that punctuated the silence of her bedroom. Groaning, she pulled the covers over her head, hoping it would magically cease. It didn't. Resigned, she threw back the covers and followed the sound. The plinking grew louder as she neared the corner of the room. There, nestled in the intersection of wall and ceiling, was a dark, wet patch. A drop of water swelled, detached, and landed with a definitive plink in a small puddle forming on the hardwood floor. "Oh, for crying out loud," she muttered. She grabbed a bucket from the bathroom and positioned it beneath the leak. Then, armed with a flashlight and a stepladder, she ventured into the attic. The air was thick with dust and the scent of aged wood. Beams of sunlight pierced through cracks in the roof, illuminating dancing motes of dust. Daisy scanned the underside of the roof, but the source of the leak remained elusive. Everything looked uniformly damp. Defeated, she descended, coughing. Maybe a temporary fix was possible. She grabbed a tube of sealant and a caulking gun from the garage, praying she remembered how to use the darn thing. Back in the bedroom, precariously balanced on the stepladder, she aimed the nozzle at the crack and squeezed. A glob of sealant oozed out, thick and unruly. It landed mostly on her fingers. Blast it all. After a messy 10 minutes, during which she managed to smear sealant on the wall, the ceiling, and herself, she declared the attempt a failure. The leak, unimpressed, continued its relentless plink. 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 Daisy slumped onto her bed, a wave of despair washing over her. She needed help. Real help. And she knew who could probably provide it. Jack. Her neighbor. Jack was handy. He was always tinkering with something in his garage, and his lawn was perpetually immaculate. He also possessed a quiet strength and a kind smile that made her insides do a little flutter. But asking him for help, that felt fraught. She hadn't really spoken to him since that awkward encounter last month, when she'd tripped over his garden gnome while retrieving her runaway cat. He'd been very gracious, helping her up and asking if she was all right, but she'd been so flustered she'd mumbled a thank you and practically ran back inside. Now she needed him. And the thought of facing him, of admitting her incompetence with a caulking gun, made her palms sweat. She paced her living room, arguing with herself. Just ask him. It's a leaky roof, not a marriage proposal. But her inner voice countered, he'll probably think you're a complete idiot. And then what? Finally, with a deep breath, she marched out the front door and across the lawn to Jack's house. His truck was parked in the driveway, and she could hear the faint whir of a power tool emanating from the garage. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the doorbell. Then, steeling herself, she pressed it. The whirring stopped and a moment later, Jack appeared, wiping his hands on a rag. He was wearing a faded blue t-shirt and jeans, and his hair was slightly disheveled. He looked good. Daisy. What a surprise, he said, his smile genuine. Everything all right? Well, not exactly, she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. I have a bit of a situation with my roof. She explained the leak, her failed attempts at repair, and her utter helplessness. She avoided eye contact, focusing instead on a patch of dirt on his garage floor. When she finished, there was a moment of silence. Then, Jack chuckled. A leaky roof, huh? I've dealt with a few of those in my time. Tell you what, let me grab my ladder, and we'll take a look. No promises, but I'll do what I can. Relief washed over her so intensely, it almost made her weak. Oh, Jack, that would be amazing. Thank you. His smile widened. No problem at all, Daisy. Happy to help. He turned back towards the garage. Let me just grab my tools. As she watched him disappear into the garage, Daisy couldn't help but feel a flicker of something more than just gratitude. Maybe, just maybe, this leaky roof was a blessing in disguise. Tools and shingles. Jack rummaged in his shed, emerging with a tool belt slung low on his hips and a weathered toolbox. "Right," he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "First, we assess the damage properly. See what we're dealing with before we start tearing things up. Then, we pull the old shingles, lay down some underlayment if it's needed, and nail the new shingles in place. Simple, really." He winked and Daisy felt a flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with roofing. He produced a claw hammer, a utility knife, and a flat pry bar, laying them out on the grass like surgical instruments. "Safety first," he added, handing her a pair of thick work gloves. "And these?" He held up safety glasses. Daisy took them, her fingers brushing against his. The latter felt rickety beneath her feet, each rung digging into her palms. When she reached the top and swung her leg over the edge of the roof, a wave of vertigo washed over her. The ground seemed a long way down. "Easy does it," Jack said, his voice calm and reassuring. He was already kneeling, examining a patch of missing shingles. "Hold tight to the ladder, and shuffle over here. You'll be fine." She followed his instructions, her heart pounding. The asphalt shingles were rough and gritty under her hands. The sun beat down, baking the roof and turning the air thick and heavy. Jack showed her how to use the pry bar to lift the damaged shingles, his hand briefly covering hers. His touch was warm and calloused, sending another unexpected jolt through her. He worked with a quiet efficiency, his movements economical and precise. The muscles in his forearms flexed as he levered the old shingles free. "Here, you try," he said, handing her the pry bar. Daisy hesitated, then took the tool. She wedged it under a stubborn shingle and pulled. It came away with a satisfying rip, scattering bits of tar paper and gravel. "Good," Jack said, his smile genuine. "You've got the knack for it." As they worked side by side, the initial fear faded, replaced by a strange sense of camaraderie. She watched Jack, the way the sun glinted off the silver in his hair, the focused concentration in his eyes, the easy strength in his movements. There was a quiet competence about him that she found incredibly appealing. He was patient, explaining each step, making sure she understood what she was doing. He even showed her how to properly swing the hammer, his hand gently guiding hers. At one point, she almost lost her footing, her ankle twisting on the uneven surface. Jack reached out, his arm a solid brace against her back. "Careful there," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. Daisy straightened, her cheeks flushed. "Thanks," she managed, her voice barely a whisper. The air between them crackled with unspoken tension. It was more than just gratitude she felt, it was a pull, a connection that surprised and intrigued her. The roof repair had become something else entirely. Almost touching. Daisy aligned the new shingle, the asphalt radiating warmth into her open palm. Jack, brow furrowed in keen focus, positioned the first nail under the hammer. Each ringing strike echoed across the still afternoon, a miniature tremor vibrating through the soles of her boots. Adjusting her stance, her hand grazed his. A startling jolt, like static electricity, leaped up her arm. Not painful, but a vibrant hum resonated within her. Jack remained unfazed, utterly absorbed in his task. He hammered on. Daisy, however, felt completely thrown off kilter. That fleeting contact had unleashed a riot of butterflies in her stomach, a skittish energy that clumsified her movements. She upended the nail box, sending a cascade of fasteners skittering across the gritty surface. "Whoops," she muttered, bending to retrieve them, her cheeks aflame. Jack paused, arching his back with a groan. "Need a hand with that?" "No, I'm fine," she replied too quickly, avoiding his gaze. The mingled scent of cut wood and his familiar cologne filled the air, a heady perfume that threatened to disorient her. She scooped up the errant nails, her fingertips trembling almost imperceptibly. "Easy there," Jack murmured, his voice a warm breath near her ear. "Wouldn't want you to get stuck." His proximity was almost palpable, a comforting heat emanating from him. Daisy scrambled upright, feeling utterly ridiculous. "Right. Nails. Essential." She pasted on a smile that felt brittle and false. So, more shingles, then? He nodded, the corners of his eyes crinkling in a familiar way. More shingles it is. You hold steady, I'll drive em home. But holding steady proved more challenging than anticipated. Each time Jack's arm swung, each time he shifted his weight across the incline, Daisy registered it with sharp awareness. The way the sun glinted off the silver threads in his hair, the laugh lines around his eyes that spoke volumes, the quiet power in his hands as he plied the hammer, it was all amplified, heightened by the surprising current that had zipped between them. She attempted to focus on the job, on the coarse feel of the shingles and the precise placement of each fastener. But her thoughts kept returning to that brief, accidental touch. Was she imagining things, or had he sensed it too? Was she overthinking a simple, innocent brush of skin? The afternoon sun blazed down, turning the air thick and stifling. Daisy swiped a droplet of perspiration from her brow, her pulse a frantic drumbeat against her ribs. She stole a glance at Jack, who was humming tunelessly under his breath as he worked, blissfully unaware of her internal chaos. He seemed so grounded, so at peace. How could she be so disconcerted, so shaken by something so insignificant? With a silent sigh, she forced her attention back. One shingle at a time. One nail at a time. Just get through this, she mentally repeated. Just get through this, and perhaps, just perhaps, she could decipher this bewildering sensation. The windy rescue. The last rays of sun painted the sky in hues of orange and violet as they finished securing the final shingles. Daisy stretched, her back protesting the hours spent bent over. Finally done, she sighed, pulling off her work gloves. Jack grinned, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. Just in time. Feels like a storm's brewing. He pointed to the dark clouds gathering on the horizon. A sudden, sharp gust of wind whipped across the rooftop, making Daisy stumble. She gasped, instinctively reaching for her wide-brimmed straw hat, but it was too late. The hat, a recent purchase she'd been particularly fond of, was lifted clean off her head, tumbling end over end towards the edge of the roof. My hat! Daisy cried, taking a step forward, her heart sinking. It was a silly thing to be upset about, but the hat felt like a symbol of this new, independent chapter in her life. Before she could react further, Jack lunged, his movements surprisingly agile for a man his age. He reached the edge just as the hat was about to sail into the neighbor's yard, snatching it out of the air with a flourish. He turned back, a wide, genuine smile lighting up his face. The wind tousled his silver hair, making him look younger, more carefree. Got it, he called out, his voice slightly breathless. Daisy's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't just the hat. It was the quickness of his reflexes, the genuine concern in his eyes, the way the wind seemed to sculpt his features into something almost heroic. He carefully made his way back to her, holding the hat out with both hands, as if presenting her with a precious gift. Here you go, he said softly, his gaze meeting hers. Almost lost it to the wild blue yonder. Daisy took the hat, her fingers brushing against his. A jolt, familiar and unwelcome, shot through her. Thank you, Jack, she managed, her voice a little shaky. She quickly placed the hat back on her head, tugging it down firmly. The wind seemed to have picked up even more, swirling around them, carrying the scent of rain and distant thunder. Jack's eyes held hers for a beat too long, and Daisy felt a blush creep up her neck. He cleared his throat, breaking the spell. We should probably get down from here, he said, gesturing towards the ladder. Wouldn't want to get caught in a downpour. Daisy nodded, grateful for the interruption. She couldn't deny the growing attraction, but the timing felt wrong. Complicated. Still, as she followed Jack towards the ladder, she couldn't help but steal a glance back at him. The wind was still whipping around him, and he stood tall and strong, a reassuring presence against the darkening sky. Juice boxes and animals. The sun beat down relentlessly, turning the black shingles into miniature ovens. Daisy wiped sweat from her brow with the back of her hand, leaving a smudge of grime. Okay, she gasped, I think I need a 5-minute reprieve before I spontaneously combust. Jack chuckled, his face flushed and his t-shirt clinging to his back. Sounds good to me. I'm feeling a little crispy around the edges myself. He carefully descended the ladder, his movements surprisingly agile for his age. Daisy followed, grateful for solid ground beneath her feet. They sat in the shade of the old oak tree in Daisy's front yard, the rough bark cool against her back. Daisy rummaged in her battered cooler, pulling out 2 juice boxes. Orange, she offered, holding one out to Jack. He raised an eyebrow. Seriously? Juice boxes? Daisy grinned. Hey, don't knock it till you try it. Best thing I could find in the pantry this morning. Besides, it's nostalgic. Remember these? Jack laughed, accepting the juice box. Yeah, I remember them being a lot bigger. He poked the straw in and took a long sip. Okay, I admit it. This hits the spot. A comfortable silence settled between them, punctuated only by the chirping of crickets and the occasional car passing by. Daisy watched a squirrel chase another up the oak, its bushy tail twitching. So Jack said, breaking the silence, what do you do when you're not rescuing damsels in distress from leaky roofs? Daisy shrugged. I work at the animal shelter. Mostly cleaning cages and feeding the residents, but it's rewarding. What about you? Besides being a master roofer, that is. I dabble in woodworking, Jack said, a hint of pride in his voice. Mostly small stuff. Birdhouses, picture frames. Keeps me busy. He paused. I always wanted a dog, but never really had the time or the space. Maybe someday. Daisy's face lit up. Dogs. I love dogs. We have this adorable little terrier mix at the shelter right now. He's missing a leg, but he's the sweetest thing. 3-legged dogs are the best. 3-legged dogs? Jack repeated, a smile playing on his lips. You have a soft spot for the underdogs, huh? Definitely, Daisy said, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. I think they have more character. She hesitated, then added, what's your favorite kind of dog? Always been partial to golden retrievers, Jack replied. Loyal, friendly, good companions. Good choice, Daisy agreed. Though I'm more of a scruffy mutt kind of girl myself. They've got stories to tell, you know. Jack looked at her, his eyes crinkling at the corners. I think I'm starting to see that myself. He stood up, brushing off his jeans. Well, as much as I'm enjoying this juicebox-fueled conversation, I suppose we should get back to the roof before the sun sets completely. Daisy stood up too, feeling a renewed energy. Right, she said, smiling. Back to the oven. But somehow, the thought of climbing back onto the roof didn't seem quite so daunting anymore. The rainstorm. The sun, which had been a cheerful companion all morning, vanished behind a curtain of bruised purple. A gust of wind, smelling of wet earth and something wilder, like ozone, whipped Daisy's hair across her face. She squinted, tucking a stray strand behind her ear. Think we're in for a downpour, Jack? Jack glanced up, his weathered face creasing around the eyes. The wind tugged at the loose edge of the tarp they were using to cover the damaged section of shingles. Looks that way. We need to get this sealed up tight. He hammered another nail with a decisive thwack. Fat raindrops began to splatter against the roof, each one a dark, spreading stain on the aged cedar. The air grew thick with humidity. Daisy grabbed another shingle, her fingers fumbling with the nails in her pouch. The cedar, already dry and brittle, was becoming dangerously slick. Careful there, Daisy, Jack called out, his voice tight with concern. Don't want you taking a tumble. She nodded, shifting her weight carefully. The angle of the roof suddenly felt steeper, the distance to the ground more significant. The rain intensified, blurring the edges of the houses below into a watercolor wash of grays and greens. Maybe we should call it? Daisy shouted over the rising wind and drumming rain. Jack hesitated, his gaze fixed on the exposed section of roof. Almost got it. Just need to secure this final piece. He reached for the tube of sealant, his movements deliberate. But the rain was relentless, turning the sealant nozzle into a slippery weapon. He squeezed, but the tube slipped in his grasp, squirting a dollop onto the already wet cedar. Damn, he muttered, wiping his hand on his jeans. Daisy felt a surge of adrenaline. Not just the rain, but the urgency in Jack's voice. Let me hold that for you, she offered, inching closer to him. The roof was treacherous now, a skating rink of cedar and rain. Each movement was a gamble. He looked at her, his eyes shadowed beneath the brim of his worn baseball cap. You sure? Positive, she said, her voice trembling slightly. The nearness of him, the shared sense of peril, amplified everything. She took the sealant, bracing herself against the slick surface. He worked quickly, his movements precise despite the conditions. The rain plastered his shirt to his back, revealing the strong lines of his shoulders. Just a few more nails, he said, his breath warm against her ear. Daisy held her breath, her heart hammering against her ribs. This wasn't just about fixing a roof anymore. It was about trust, about risk, about the unspoken connection that had been building between them. The storm raged around them, a chaotic symphony of wind and rain, but on that precarious patch of roof, something else was taking shape. The slip. The old shingles were slick beneath his boots. Rain from the previous night still clung stubbornly to the mossy patches, turning the afternoon sun into treacherous glares. Jack shifted a bundle of new asphalt, the weight momentarily throwing him off balance. He adjusted, chuckling nervously, could use some crampons up here. Daisy, a few feet away, securing a section of flashing, only offered a tight smile. She was too focused on the task, and maybe a little too aware of Jack's proximity, to banter easily. The air crackled with unspoken tension. He took another step, reaching for the nail gun he'd laid down. That's when it happened. His boot landed on a particularly slick patch of algae. His feet went out from under him, a sickening scrabble against the rough surface. He flailed, arms windmilling, a choked cry escaping his lips. The tools slid, scattering uselessly. Time seemed to distort. The world tilted at a sickening angle, the edge of the roof looming closer with terrifying speed. He saw Daisy's face, a mask of pure horror, and then, nothing but the expanse of the yard below. A jolt ripped through his arm. Daisy had lunged, her small hand clamping around his wrist with surprising strength. The sudden stop sent a searing pain through his shoulder, but it was infinitely preferable to the alternative. He dangled precariously, his feet kicking at the shingles, searching for purchase. Jack. Her voice was strained, every muscle in her arm trembling. Hold on. I've got you. He gritted his teeth, finding a handhold on the exposed rafters. Slowly, painstakingly, he pulled himself upward, Daisy's grip a lifeline against the void. Finally, he was back on the relative safety of the roof, collapsing onto the damp shingles, gasping for breath. Daisy didn't release his wrist. She knelt beside him, her knuckles white, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Rainwater beaded in her dark eyelashes, magnifying the intensity of her gaze. He looked up at her, his heart hammering against his ribs. For a long moment, they were locked in each other's eyes, the world around them fading into insignificance. He saw genuine fear, relief, and something else. Something deeper, more vulnerable. A flicker of something he hadn't dared to hope for. And then, a realization dawned in Daisy's eyes, a slow understanding of the magnitude of what had just happened. It wasn't just about saving him from a fall. It was about the sheer, terrifying thought of losing him. Of what his absence would mean. The warmth in her cheeks blossomed into a deep blush. She released his wrist, suddenly self-conscious. Are you all right?" she stammered, avoiding his gaze. Jack swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. "Yeah," he managed, his voice hoarse. "Yeah, I'm all right. Thanks to you." He knew, with a certainty that resonated deep within him, that the roof repair was the least of what had just changed between them. Hot cocoa and jokes. Rain lashed down, relentless and cold. The tarp. Daisy yelled, her voice barely audible above the roar of the storm. Jack scrambled towards the folded square of heavy canvas, wrestling with the wind that tried to rip it from his grasp. Together they managed to drag it over the gaping hole in Daisy's roof, securing the edges with whatever loose bricks and debris they could find. Water streamed down their faces, plastering their hair to their scalps. They looked at each other, a shared grimace turning into a watery grin. "Well," Jack said, spitting out a stray raindrop, "that's mostly covered." Daisy laughed, a genuine, uninhibited sound that the storm seemed to momentarily respect, quieting just enough for it to be heard. "Mostly is good enough for now. Race you inside." Without waiting for an answer, she took a running leap, landing with a splash in a puddle on the lawn. Jack followed, his landing a little less graceful, a little more dad-like. They sprinted towards the back door, the rain chasing them every step of the way. Inside, the warmth of the house hit them like a comforting blanket. Daisy grabbed 2 thick towels from the linen closet. "Get out of those wet clothes," she instructed, tossing one to Jack. "I'll make hot cocoa." While Daisy busied herself in the kitchen, Jack stripped off his soaked t-shirt, shivering slightly. He rubbed his hair vigorously with the towel, watching Daisy move around the kitchen with a comfortable familiarity. The way the soft light caught the curve of her cheek, the easy sway of her hips as she reached for mugs, it was all captivating. Soon, 2 steaming mugs sat on the kitchen table. Daisy slid one towards Jack. The rich, chocolatey aroma filled the air, a welcome antidote to the damp chill that still clung to them. "Thanks," Jack said, wrapping his hands around the warm mug. "This is exactly what I needed." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, sipping their cocoa. The rain continued its relentless assault on the windows. "So," Daisy said, breaking the silence, "tell me a joke." "You always have one ready." Jack cleared his throat, a mischievous glint in his eyes. "What do you call a lazy kangaroo?" Daisy raised an eyebrow, playing along. "I don't know. What?" "Pouch potato." Daisy groaned dramatically, but a smile played on her lips. "Oh, Jack, that's terrible." "But did it make you smile?" he countered, his eyes twinkling. Daisy's gaze met his, and her heart did a little flutter kick. It wasn't just the joke, it was the warmth in his eyes, the genuine desire to make her happy. It was the simple act of sharing hot cocoa on a stormy afternoon, wrapped in towels, feeling a connection that went beyond fixing a leaky roof. The rain outside seemed to fade into background noise, replaced by the quiet hum of something new and unexpected blossoming between them. A wonderful adventure. The final shingle settled, a solid whump that mirrored the burgeoning relief inside Daisy. She swiped at the sheen on her forehead, the sunset ablaze with vermilion and violet. Down below, Mrs. Henderson's roses blazed like tiny bonfires. The air, thick with resinous pine and the sharp tang of fresh asphalt, vibrated with an energy that made her skin prickle. "Well now," Jack's voice, a deep timbre that resonated within her, broke the silence. He straightened, a groan escaping his lips as his muscles stretched beneath his worn t-shirt. "That's a roof fit to keep out any storm." A laugh bubbled from Daisy, a bright, almost forgotten sound. "Indeed it is. A vast improvement, to say the least." He vaulted off the ladder, landing softly on the lawn and extending a hand towards her. "Mind yourself." She hesitated only a heartbeat before accepting. His palm was rough, yet warm and reassuring, a jolt of electricity traveling up her arm as he helped her descend. Once her feet found solid ground, he lingered, his hand giving hers a brief, meaningful squeeze, his eyes crinkling at the corners with a smile. Her pulse quickened. She returned his gaze, a silent language passing between them in the twilight. "Thank you, Jack," she managed, her voice a touch unsteady. He released her hand, the sudden absence oddly noticeable. Picking up a wayward hammer, he tossed it into his toolbox with a metallic clang. "Anytime, Daisy. Happy to lend a hand." He paused, adding, "Truth be told, I enjoyed the company." Those simple words sent a little thrill through her. Enjoyed. Was it merely the satisfaction of a job well done? Or was something else stirring between them, a silent melody hanging in the air like the perfume of night-blooming jasmine? They stood for a moment, a comfortable quiet punctuated by the chirp of crickets and the distant bark of a dog. Daisy studied Jack, really saw him. The laugh lines etched around his eyes, the silver highlights in his hair, the genuine warmth of his smile. He was a good man, through and through. And something was definitely transpiring. I should probably head out, he said, disrupting the fragile atmosphere. Gotta pack up. Right, Daisy echoed, a flicker of disappointment surfacing. Well, thanks again. I truly appreciate it. He nodded, a hint of a smile gracing his lips. See you around, Daisy. Watching him depart, his toolbox a familiar weight on his shoulder, Daisy had a revelation. This was more than just a repaired roof. More than just a neighborly gesture. This was the dawn of something new, something unexpected taking root. A friendship, certainly. And perhaps, just perhaps, a chance at something more. A promising start.